For 10,000 years, they've been having sex. That's how you got here.
Are we recording right now?
Yes.
Okay. Because even if the outtakes, I'm not going to say what I was going to say. Oh my god.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. I'm one of your hosts. I'm joined by your other host, Scott Melson.
What's up, dude?
Hello, Dr. Scott.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Man, I'm delightful.
This is weird. We're recording this without the music in the background, and I kind of miss it.
I know.
We'll add it in. The listeners, you'll hear it, but we don't hear it now.
What's funny is that this is how we did it for like the first 9
Right.
months. And only recently have we been able to do the music real time. And now that we don't have it, it's like something's missing.
It's like when people first invented the wheel. How did they live before that?
You didn't leave your iPad. You said you left it at home.
Yeah.
It's not in your old car.
No.
With your old transmission.
No. Yeah, I got a new... My car went kaput, and I got a new one.
What did you get? Tell everybody.
I got an Outback.
Yeah, you did.
Because you also have an Outback.
You did. And what color is it?
It's blue.
Not just blue. It's Outback navy blue, and I know that.
It's not Outback navy blue.
It's the same color as my Outback.
Is it really?
Yes.
That's stupid. I put the Let's Fix This sticker on it today, though, so that's pretty exciting. All right, so in today's episode, we don't talk about cars, although that would be a fun episode. And we don't talk about Star Trek either. We talked about discussing Star Wars and Star Trek this episode. We should still do that.
We should.
For the 7 really geeky listeners.
Well, we got to have Ed on to do it.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yes. That was tremendous.
Ed, if you're listening, we haven't emailed you in like a week. It's been a crazy week. You're coming on the show, and we're going to talk about farming, tariffs, co-ops,
yes,
and Star Wars / Trek.
Right. So in 3 weeks. Maybe next month, because in 3 weeks we're gone. So next week we're going to visit with Daniela, who is a political consultant pertaining to communication specifically. She's a PhD in applied linguistics.
You didn't know that was a thing, did you?
I didn't. And so we're going to talk to her. She used to be on faculty at OU, and I met her kind of, through things. And so we're going to talk about messaging in politics and how it matters and how words matter, which I think is a really great topic.
Someone should tell the president.
Someone should tell a lot of people, because people are just throwing around words like they don't mean anything. And I'm telling you, strategery.
Lockbox.
And so that'll be next week.
I'm feeling feisty today. I don't know why.
In 2 weeks, we're going to talk to...
In 2 weeks, we will have the Solicitor General of the state of Oklahoma being on with us to talk with us about what the Solicitor General does, what the Attorney General does, what their office does. Mithen's going to be on with us. It should be, I think, a really great interview. He's a great guy, and should be a lot of fun.
That's just super exciting. I have no idea what the Solicitor General does. I know that you can put no soliciting on your door.
Different.
Yeah, I had a hunch.
Different.
So that's exciting. So that's the next 2 weeks planned out. We've got some great guests lined up after that we haven't quite nailed down to a date yet, so we'll just tell you before we get there.
Fun fact, do you know who was a former Solicitor General of the state of Oklahoma?
No.
Scott Pruitt.
Was he really?
He was.
Well, that'll be 2 things we'll mention today in this episode about Scott Pruitt. That's right. Pruitt Watch.
You're ready for it. You know it.
Coming up.
You're excited.
So let's do a really quick news roundup. And this is my turn this week. I got articles.
Look at you.
I have read them even, which is an improvement. So I finished my grad program. I have an MBA now. I heard that I graduated, or that I successfully passed all my courses. And so I've got a lot more free time now, which is great because I've got stuff to do.
And extra letters to put after your name.
And extra letters, which... so far, I've not generated any additional income. But first on our list is this is still breaking news because it's breaking my brain.
It's freaking bizarre.
That so the recreational marijuana petition that was going around, people were totally razzed about. Green the Vote was the group that was behind it, and they were pushing this anyway, but especially in response to the medical marijuana stuff. People were upset about that. It's still going. It's out there. You can submit for a license. They should be issuing the first licenses this month. So far, success. After that enormous hiccup or speed bump they had. But green, yeah, whoops-a-daisy. But this Green the Vote, it's pushing for full recreational marijuana, right? Smoke them if you got them. There's a legal how much you can have on your body, on your person, in your possession, whatever, and you can smoke it and eat it and do whatever people do with it.
Wait. Do people do things with marijuana besides smoke it or eat it?
Probably, I don't know, suppositories, is that a thing? It is with alcohol.
I mean, what?
Yeah, do you know about this?
No.
So yeah, the kids these days will soak a tampon in like vodka and then insert it in their rectum, and then they can get drunk really quickly without drinking anything, so their breath doesn't smell like alcohol.
I was gonna say why, but I guess that's why.
The people I've spoken to that have done this like do it and then go to the movies, and they're like drunk at the movies, which is what kids did in high school when I was there. But they just drank, they just smuggled in booze. Now they're just putting a booze-soaked tampon into their rectum.
For everyone out there who's 21 and over, they make this. It's a nifty little device. It's called a flask.
This is my comment. It's a lot of work to do this.
If you don't want to insert a soaked tampon into your rectum.
Well, they do it when they're underage. It's not if they're over 21, they just drink. But the kids these days. But this is way more effort than people I knew. People I knew just stole it from their parents or something. Their older brother.
Yes.
But this is a lot of effort put forth to get drunk, and also during a movie. Like, you're just sitting there.
Right.
And, hey, listen, I don't know. Kids.
I've
not addressed this with my children yet.
You're getting old when you're just like, what? Why can't you drink like an adult? Why would you do that? That just sounds terrible.
Listen,
anyway, Green the Vote. Marijuana.
We are way off topic. All right, so Green the Vote. There were a couple of Facebook videos that came out in the past week or so, and the first one was by some of the board members who basically said, you know what, all the numbers you've been hearing about the number of people who have signed the petition are a total lie.
They posted it on Facebook like grown-ups do.
Right. To quote them, Jamie Knoll said, quite frankly, it's a big lie. So NonDoc has the story. And we'll put this on our blog post along with this episode. But yeah, they came out, and the director of Green the Vote, Isaac Cavanes, came back and said, like very late, like close to midnight, put out a video of his own with two other people and basically said, yeah, I sure did. And he did it.
Not only that, they asked him, so he turned in signatures on the 8th, because August 8th is the day that signatures were due to the Secretary of State's office. Right. And then one of the media asked him, like, so how many signatures do you have? And he said, and I quote, I really have no idea.
He doesn't. And so the whole deal was that and we'll talk about this more next week with Daniela, but the whole deal was he was afraid that that if he told people the number that he thought might be more accurate, it would be discouraging. And so he thought by inflating it and saying, like, we've got 120,000 or we've got 140,000, people would be super excited. And I think a lot of people were excited, but it may have backfired, right? And so let's not get into it because that's next week's discussion.
That's true. And I wonder, like, so what goes through your head? If I tell them that I only have 70,000 signatures, they'll be depressed. All right, fine. But what happens when you turn in 80,000 signatures to the Secretary of State, and then the Secretary of State is like, you have 60,000 valid signatures because we threw out 20, and then everybody's like, but you told us you had 150, right?
Right.
Like,
I'm saying, well, next week we'll talk about this, that just because you think it means something doesn't mean the people that hear it think it means the same thing.
So, children, if you're listening to Let's Pod This, 2 lessons so far this week. Number 1, do not put a vodka-soaked tampon in your rectum. 2, don't lie.
It's one of those things I never thought I'd say out loud in my entire life.
No lying and no vodka-soaked rectal tampons.
And don't lie about those. Yes. Also, parents, we apologize if you're listening to this in your car and your kids are asking weird questions. All right, so
what's a rectum?
Right, yeah. Darn near killed them.
What's a tampon?
It's also, yeah, the birds and the bees are a whole different story.
Should we mark this one explicit?
No, it's not. This is actual human, like, body parts.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
You're a doctor.
Yeah,
it's medical science.
Yeah.
Don't do this. All right, so the second article
I'm going to start adding this to my well child checks.
You should. Also, your resume.
Parents and teenagers, make sure they're not soaking vodka. They're not soaking tampons in booze and putting it up their bum.
Right, well, so in their bum, because the whole deal is it's a more vascular area, so it's absorbed more quickly.
No, physiologically, I understand why it works.
You get drunk in a hurry.
But Jesus.
Everybody has some bad ideas. I don't think that Jesus would support this. Also, that's literally putting new wine in old wineskins, if you know what I mean. Anyway, that's a Bible joke. All right, so
from a Nazarene,
indeed. All right, so in the New York Times, which is not a local news outlet, but I think that this is a very interesting article. So they had an opinion piece on July 30th entitled "The Maps That Show the City versus Country Is Not Our Political Fault Line." Scott, you sent this to me, and in this article, the author Colin Woodard postulates that the divisions in our politics are not urban and rural, but that they are based on historical immigration trends, right? And so, like, where people came from like the Netherlands, that they come from
what is now the UK, Germany.
Yeah.
Like basically he goes back to the colonies and looks at what the spread of, like, what the migration patterns were at the time of the revolution and then immediately thereafter, as well as what the patterns of immigration, so both migration and immigration, and comes up with, I think, is it 13, 12? It's been a couple of weeks since I read the article, but he comes up with a series of what he calls nations that, when you kind of divide up the United States according to these migratory and ethnic patterns, they actually plot really, really well with modern voting behavior.
Right. So so Oklahoma is divided between two of these groups, but just barely. One is Greater Appalachia, which is basically West Virginia, Kentucky, the southern region of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, the northern regions of the South. It kind of goes across St. Louis down, and then it includes most of central and southeastern Oklahoma, and then down into central and central western Texas, Lubbock, out that area, and most of the Panhandle. And then just north of that is what he calls the Midlands, and that is a really weird-shaped, thin band that, like, goes through Pennsylvania in the northern half of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, most of Iowa, and then a thin strip of the Dakotas and Nebraska down, and then the Oklahoma Panhandle. And that area, so the Midlands, voted almost, I take it back. I was saying almost entirely for Trump, but no, it voted, that area overall voted narrowly for Clinton. But then the Appalachia region, so West Virginia through Oklahoma and a big swath of like Lubbock area of Texas, voted very strongly for Trump. And so, anyway, it's a fascinating take. I don't know if he's right or wrong, but it was a way to think about this divide that was very different than what we typically hear.
I totally agree. I mean, the article is fascinating. It is 100% worth a read. And even if you don't have a subscription to the New York Times, you get, I think, 5 articles a month, so you can go back and get
it's free.
Yeah.
We'll link to it in our blog post.
Yeah, it is. It's a very. I've not seen anyone break voting behavior down this way. And I thought there would be, when the article came out, I thought there'd be a little bit more buzz about it. I thought the folks at 538 in particular would have something to say about it, but they haven't. But yeah, get on, take a look, read Colin Woodard, right? Read his kind of postulate and see what you think. He's a writer for the New York Times. Like, he submits pieces to the New York Times, but I believe that he full-time, he writes for a newspaper in Maine. He's out of Portland, Maine, I believe.
Could be.
But the piece is absolutely fascinating.
It's great, yeah. And then our last article for today is about you know who.
It makes me so happy.
Pruitt Watch.
It's back.
Former EPA chief, former Oklahoma AG, Scott Pruitt.
Can't stop making news.
I like that you sent this to me with no comment. You just sent the article. And so I'm like, well, we have to include this. So the headline, this is on, I've got NBC News is what you sent to me.
That's correct.
Court orders ban on harmful pesticide and says that the EPA violated the law. And so basically the EPA, under Scott Pruitt's instruction, broke the law by ignoring the conclusion of a bunch of scientists
Who work for the EPA.
Right. And so basically he tried to undo this, which it's just,
It's a chemical. It is a chemical,
pesticide, right?
A pesticide made by Dow Chemicals that causes developmental abnormalities in children's brains.
So it's not good.
And Scott Pruitt was like, we should still be spraying this on our veggies.
And so it was created by Dow Chemicals back in the 60s. They have voluntarily decided to not use it in homes. There's also, the EPA has a no-spray buffer zone around sensitive sites like schools. In 2015, the Obama administration proposed banning the pesticide on food, but Pruitt reversed that in 2017, basically taking the Dow Chemicals position and saying that it's like Dow was like, it's not that bad. I mean, it's fine. Your science is flawed.
It's inconclusive.
Well, so of course that the company who created it, their scientists said it's totally fine. Like your science is flawed, and then the rest of the scientists were like, no, this really jacked up some kids and ruined their lives and their parents, and this is not okay. So, anyway. Also, I don't have an article for this, but Scott, did you see the article about that the U.S. was relaxing the restrictions or the ban or whatever on importing asbestos?
What?
Yeah, so they were like, well, we're going to relax the thing. Asbestos isn't that big of a deal. We're one of the few countries that still allow asbestos. Fun fact, do you know which country in the world exports the most asbestos and which one we import the most asbestos from?
China? I don't know.
No, Russia.
Oh, good to know.
Russia.
So
I was like, why does asbestos even matter? We've got better. Oh my god.
That's a coincidence, right?
Just have a quinkydink.
Coincidence. Hey, do you get Bob's number?
Bob
Mueller.
I don't have Bob. No, sorry.
Someone should tell him about this.
Someone. Hey, listen. Mueller.
Hot tip.
Mueller.
Hot tip.
Mueller.
That's just asbestos. Really? So we're
putting such a random thing.
We're putting tariffs on aluminum, steel, and soybeans, but we're going to allow increased imports of asbestos.
Your iPhone costs more, but cancer is free, my friend. You can. It's an express lane for that stuff.
Oh my god.
All right. Anyway, hey, now that we've got all that out of our system, the last half of our episodes of this week is going to be a really great interview with State Senator AJ Griffin, who's a public servant in several regards. She'll tell us about her history running a social services and mental health organization, and we want to get kind of a post-mortem on her experience in the state legislature. She was pretty vocal about this while she was in, especially towards the end during all of those extra special sessions. And so it's a treat for us to talk to her and get her insight into her experience there.
Great legislator, great person, a lot of fun to talk to. Really grateful to her for coming on the show.
That's right. All right, so let's take a break. When we come back, Senator AJ Griffin. Hey, we're joined by Senator AJ Griffin from Guthrie. Hello, Senator. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Well, so you are, I guess in your waning days, they would call you a lame duck, but I feel like that's such an offensive term of your time in the Senate. How long have you been in the Senate?
I was first elected in April of 2012, so it's about 6.5 years of service. So I completed an unexpired term and then was reelected in 2014 and ready to move on.
Sure. Now, what did you do before you were in the Senate?
I was elected while I was the executive director of an agency called Logan Community Services, which is one of the network of youth serving agencies across the state. But we were kind of a full service nonprofit with multiple state contracts, drug court, outpatient mental health treatment, children's shelter, juvenile justice programs, parenting classes with DHS, and a little bit of everything. And I had served in that role for about 8 years, and came from a nonprofit startup prior to that after a few years in the classroom.
Excellent. Well, what made you decide to take a run for office?
Like most of the women in the legislature, I was recruited. I was actually recruited by the Guthrie Chamber of Commerce, came knocking on my door one day.
Mm-hmm.
And I had done a lot of advocacy work just in my role at the agency. And prior to that, in fact, one of the things I'm going to dedicate some of my time to upon leaving is the Institute for Child Advocacy, because I kind of credit my experience working with that group, advocating for children's issues that was my preparation and tutorial in how to serve in the legislature. So I always say that I learned just about everything I knew from Ann Roberts, and I credit her for being able to get bills through the process pretty early on in my career.
Sure, I know Ann pretty well, and she's just a delightful, wonderful person, and I've never heard anyone say anything different than that.
Yep.
And
she's great, and she is one of my mentors in service. That's for certain.
I totally understand. And OICA, I mean, aside from being a great organization, I think Joe Dorman, I can say he's a friend of the pod, although I don't know if he's even been on yet, has he?
He's not been on yet. It's been a scheduling conflict several times to get him on.
Text him. But we got to co-host Child Advocacy Day the last 2 years, and that was a great honor and privilege at the Capitol. Well, looking back,
Joe's one of my favorite to have on the radio whenever I am subbing on KOKC. So you need to have him on. He's a great guest.
He is, and he can talk with authority about a wide range of topics.
Yes.
That happens after a few years in the legislature.
That's very
Either
true.
that or you get really good at making it up.
Right.
One or the other.
That's exactly right. It's like parenting.
Exactly.
So looking back at your time in the legislature, now you did not finish out all the years that you could have been there, and I think your decision to not seek re-election was met with some surprise by a lot of folks, and certainly some disappointment by a lot of folks as well. But looking back, what would you consider your biggest accomplishment while you were there?
Well, we quietly, without a lot of fanfare, made some major improvements around our policies around kids and juvenile justice. Things that I have flown across to speak about, including prudent parent standards in the way that foster parents are allowed to care for children in their care, expanding the youthful offender age in our state to 19 and a half, sealing records for juveniles in nonviolent situations if they're going to stay in the juvenile justice system, expanding autism coverage in insurance for kids that have autism that are still in the area of time where applied behavioral analysis will make a difference in their lives. So just about everything that I am very proud of is something that just chipped away at improving life for kids and youth in the state of Oklahoma. And then we made some major advancements around the mental health area as well, including assisted outpatient treatment and the repertoire of things that judges can do to intervene with individuals that have mental health issues, and of course just ensuring that the criminal justice conversation kept moving forward. And because if you're a mental health advocate, you that's something that's very important to you as well. So a lot of things that if you look at the vote count, they look like they were easy, but we're making slight adjustments here and there and trying to steer a clearer and better path for kids and youth and struggling families in Oklahoma.
That's right. Anything that looks like it was easy to pass is because there was an immense amount of work that happened before the vote.
Yes. Well, and you have to, establish yourself as an expert so that, when you put something forward, your colleagues trust you, to have done your homework, and to know it's a good thing. We had a bill this last session that, on the surface, it's something that I couldn't have passed in my first couple of years because it just didn't have the established credibility. But it changes the way that we handle drug-endangered children. So these children that are born with drugs in their system, a first instinct has been to, be mad at mom and to take kiddo away and put kiddo in DHS custody and mom in jail. And we now know that that's really not the best course of action. Science tells us something differently. But that's something that, after you've been in long enough and people trust you, when you try to do something that's a big swing and say that we're not going to immediately remove those kids, we're going to treat mom and kiddo together, and we're not going to put mom in jail, we're going to offer an opportunity to parent her child. If you try to do that in year 1 or 2, it's a heavy lift. But when you've been working on those issues for 7 years and people trust you, it passed without any questions and very little debate in committee. And if you look at the vote count, it looked like it was overwhelming and easy. So that's one of the things people don't realize whenever they go to the legislature, that it takes a little bit of time to be able to do things that are hard.
That's right. And I just want to say, as a mental health professional myself, this is one of those subtle ways to know that someone's a real deal is when they use the word kiddo.
Yes.
Everyone I know that uses that are therapists, social workers, people who've worked in the field. And that's like, as you were saying, I was like, this is our own language, not that I'm sharing with our listeners, but
pediatricians
don't
okay. Don't leave us out in the cold, man.
But it's different than child or kid or whatever. It's kiddo is like the term of endearment that gets used. So anyway, Scott, you have a question?
Yeah, I was kind of going along that same lines. You've gotten a lot of things done that I think have a profound impact on child welfare in Oklahoma. But as you look back, is there anything you worked on, anything that couldn't quite get over the finish line that you look back? And I mean, we were prepping for this and we used the word regret. I almost don't like the word regret, but like anything that you like, man, if we could have gotten this one more thing done, that would have really put kind of the cherry on top.
Well, I'm not the only one that's worked on the issue, but there's a lot of us that over the years have worked on expanding the scope of practice for our nurse practitioners. As a tool to just simplify healthcare access. And we say in rural Oklahoma, but it's for all underserved Oklahomans. And we got closer this last session than we have ever gotten, and still couldn't quite get that one across the finish line. It's got a lot of opposition from a lot of people with a lot of authority and power that we just haven't been able to overcome because, like it or not, people still trust doctors more than nurses. And I think there was an opportunity to compromise there. And my regret is that we weren't able to come up with a piece of policy that everybody could feel comfortable with. I don't regret not winning, but I do regret that we were never able to get everybody at the table and to say what we're doing right now, it inhibits access. How can we improve access and get off of that issue, being a nurse practitioner versus doctor's issue, because that really wasn't the issue at hand. It was, how do we simplify access? How do we make it easier to start a practice? How do we make it less expensive to stay in practice, especially if you're willing to serve the low-income Oklahomans that generally reside in areas where it's hard to find a doc or hard to get a doc to move there. So I regret is that we didn't ever collaborate, and I'm disappointed that we haven't seemed to have addressed that issue in a thoughtful way.
I mean, I think that's certainly going to be an issue in sessions moving forward. Kind of in your mind, as someone who's worked on this, what would you put out there as a compromise that you feel like, kind of the physician advocacy organizations and nurse practitioner PA advocacy organizations would be able to both get behind?
Well, being someone who's neither a physician or nurse practitioner, I couldn't ever come up with it because I would propose something to one side and they'd say no, and something else to say, something that the docs would accept, the nurses wouldn't accept, the nurses would accept, the docs wouldn't. So as a layperson, I wasn't ever able to get there, and I was unsuccessful trying to build a coalition to discuss the issue. So I think that's the role of the legislature that always is undervalued is that of convener.
Sure.
And so I'm hopeful that someone can come along behind myself and Representative Cockcroft and do a better job convening the issue so that the solution actually comes from the medical community. We forget, and I actually told a group yesterday morning, they were asking about school consolidation, and I finally said, look, that plan will never come from the legislature. It must come from the education community. So if we can facilitate convening those ideas, that's part of our job. But, we're not going to be able to get there without the participants and the things that it affects, the people that it affects actually solve. You got to solve the problem in the field and then tell us how to make statute match what you want. There's a lot that happens at the state capitol where we take credit for solving problems when we're really not. We're actually just putting that solution to paper.
It's really interesting the way that you frame that, because I think I know the answer to my next question, which was actually going to be, looking back on your time as a lawmaker, what to you is kind of the most difficult part? Like what is the toughest part of the job? And now obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like maybe the hardest part is sometimes getting parties of people to come to the table and address issues in which maybe you as a lawmaker don't have expertise, but trying to get these two sides to talk to each other and put out something that says, okay, here's what we can both handle. Now put this into legalese and something that, can be written into the Oklahoma statutes. Is that accurate, or is there something else?
Well, I think my biggest challenge is always that the misconceptions of what the job actually is. And, we call these, we're legislators are lawmakers. We make the laws, but we don't necessarily own the market on ideas. The best ideas actually come from constituents and the people that those laws impact, and that the least valued role is the role of convener. And, what people campaign on being able to do, you quickly learn that's not really the job. It's a team sport, and you've got to play on the team. And, I don't consider myself politically astute, although I do understand people because I ran a mental health agency. You had to learn a little bit about people, and that was great preparation for the legislature, by the way. So, there's a lot of misconceptions by people running for office, those in the office, and the public of what the job actually is. And the job's to help bring people together, come up with the solutions, and then put those solutions to paper so that they can be interpreted and enacted by other people. I always made the joke when I was speaking that nothing really happens at 23rd and Lincoln. We just rearrange words and rearrange numbers and then watch the fallout and try to get better the next time.
That's a funny way. That's a fun way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say? We'll make it a bit lighthearted now. What was the most fun? Like what was the best part? Like what was the most enjoyable kind of fun day-to-day part about being a legislator?
I have some very, very, very good friends, people that will remain my friends for the rest of my life, that love of Oklahoma as much as I do, and great senses of humor, and we had a really good time. It's just any job that if you like your coworkers, you're a whole lot better off. And then my other favorite thing was my district was big and had lots of towns in it. And so when when you get to know the people of all those communities and you get to be part of their community, I love that part of it as well. People that I will remember for the rest of my lives, World War II veterans that I got to sit and drink coffee with and hear their stories, and, women who, it could completely transform their community by just the work that they did. And then, patriarchs of Oklahoma, people like Ed Malzahn, who was the founder of Ditch Witch, who passed away recently, and I got to know him and be part of his community and benefit from his service to Oklahoma. And so, the best part's the people, and Oklahoma's full of pretty amazing people, and some of those happen to be legislators. So
Sure.
those are my friends for life, and that I think those are the things I will take with me.
I mean, I think that's great to hear you say, and I'll just sidebar a little bit. I agree with you that's an amazing part. If you're in a career or a field where that's something you get to do, I think that's amazing. I'm a primary care physician here in Oklahoma City, and that's my that is people ask like, do you what do you like about your job? What's hard about it? And there's everything. There's all kinds of things that go along with any job, but I tell people far and away. The best part of my job is getting to talk to people. Like I love getting to meet people and talk to me. And my clinic is in a place where we get folks from the metro, but also from some of the more rural parts, kind of out around the city, and just getting such a wide swath of people. You mentioned World War II vets. So when I was in training, we did some training at the VA. This was not a whole lot of years ago, but some years ago. And the VA, like people always ask, like, what's it like working at the VA? The VA is kind of its own, like, it's its own beast. And there's good parts about it, and there's not great parts about it. But the best part, far and away, was always the veterans, man. And you would go talk to these, like, these, I mean, all of them are great, but like these old, like, World War II guys and Korean War veterans. I mean, there were days where it's like, man, I have to finish my stuff and get to rounds, but I want to stay here and finish this story with this guy because he's awesome. So I feel you there. That's cool that's what you take away from the legislature as well.
Mm-hmm. It's service. I've always been a community person, and that was the best part. And it's a neat situation to be in to the people that you get to know. To know everybody from the governor to Peachy, who does the mail in the Senate, who's one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my entire life, and everybody in between, and so that even the people at the Capitol, the staff are pretty phenomenal. The sergeants and the porters and our Senate staff that are still there, and we come and go. Public servants come and go, but they're there, and they're really the part of the clock that keeps ticking. We're just kind of the window dressing many times.
We've been toying with the idea of doing a series about the sergeants, because as a just as a regular person who comes up there and sits in the gallery, like they're some of the most visible guys, always getting on you if you like hover above your seat just an inch, or if they think that you're taking video of what's happening or whatever. And I'm just full of intrigue about their histories, and the little tidbits of stories I've heard make me more interested in finding out more about those guys.
Well, any Oklahoman would love to know Bob Craig, who's the head sergeant in the Senate, and the man has stories of great values when it comes to Oklahoma history. There should be a chapter in Oklahoma history books called Bob Craig.
Nice.
I'm about to go meet him. It's funny because I haven't, recently most of the drama, if you will, has been on the other side of the rotunda. So I've met sir.
That's not just recent. I think that's always.
Most of my time in the gallery has been on the House side. So I've met some of those folks, but we'll have to get over to the Senate side and meet Bob, get him on the show.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly. What led you to decide to retire now?
Well, lots of reasons. So, you won't get anybody who's been serving who says that the last year and a half has been fun. I think most of us have a little bit of PTSD from the 2 special sessions and the fights and the challenges that we eventually were able to overcome to a certain extent. But for me personally, I am like to get things done. I have had 195 pieces of legislation signed by the governor in my tenure.
Wow.
And felt very comfortable with the amount of work personally I was able to get done. And just really thought for me, I never really planned to go into politics and stay a politician forever. I've looked at it as something to go do for a while and then return to, your real life. And that's kind of what I chose to do. The time was right for me, and I'm about to have 2 kids in college, and you do eventually need to make a living.
Right.
And so, they were going to cut what was amounted to a pretty good chunk of tuition out of our salary. So, and regardless of what people say, the way that I did the job in the Senate is a full-time job. So there was a day and a time when I think you could do it and hold down, your full career. But the devotion that I gave to the district it became all-consuming for me, and so decided that if I could not do it that way, I wasn't going to do it at all. And pleased found there are 2 great guys running for my seat, and my district will be well served by either of them, although I'm supporting the Republican, which should not surprise you at all.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, I think a couple of thoughts there. One is that when you look at the duration of tenure before and after term limits were passed, it turns out that people only served 10 to 12 years before term limits. And then once term limits passed, there was a spike where everyone that was in office just hung on as long as they could. And now it's drifting back down so that folks are staying 6, 8, 10 years and not necessarily staying the full 12 years that they are permitted under law. And so this idea, and I've tried to put this out there with our listeners and with the other folks that follow Let's Fix This, is that, it's easy to say, vote those people out, but by and large you have, or they've termed out already. And the people that are there now are not the ones that may have caused the problem that you're upset about. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's find out where responsibility lies and talk to folks and find out maybe who's there now is responsible for fixing the problem that was there that they inherited. That goes both ways.
Well, and I think that 10 years are going to get shorter and shorter. I believe this is in the day of social media, where if we go back 25 years ago when you're serving in the legislature, people they saw you at church, or they knew where your office was, or maybe they might have your home phone number. Well, now, you can see me at church, in the aisle at Walmart. You probably have my cell phone number, which is on me 24/7. If you don't, you can tweet at me. You can, follow me on Instagram. You can instant message me on Facebook. And regardless of where you're from, or if even you're my Facebook friend. And so and then of course, don't mention the hundreds of emails a day that we get during session. So the job, just because of the access that elected officials have to the public, and the access the public has to the elected official, has gotten huge.
Yeah.
And you're still expected to be at all the chamber dinners and speak to the Lions Club and be seen at the 4-H banquet and all of those things. So the job has grown significantly, and while the issues have gotten more complicated. So I am concerned, and obviously the trend that we're seeing in Oklahoma is shorter tenures and more turnover, but we're not unique. We're not an outlier. We're seeing that in state legislatures across the country,
sure,
even in states without term limits.
Sure. Well, and I think it's a great point, and that it's great that never in history has a state legislature been as accessible as they are now. But that does mean that it's a lot more work. And I think, to your credit, in my opinion, you are one of the legislators that definitely served with a statewide mindset, and that you came to this saying, I want to make the state better. And you've worked towards that in you said 197 specific legislative ways. And so one of your former colleagues, Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt, he and I were speaking at an event last year, and I was kind of talking to him offline about it, and he said it was in January. I think it was on Inauguration Day of last year, actually. And he said he was talking to some colleagues about asking them, well, what kind of legislation are you filing this year? And several of them replied that they weren't filing anything. They weren't proposing any laws. And he just looked at him like, what are you even doing here, man? Like, if you're not going to even propose any laws, like, they're like, well, I just kind of show up. And so I appreciate that has not been you.
No, that has not been me. I've been very busy, very engaged, got a lot done, and hold on a second, I just walked in somewhere, and you may hear some background noise for a second. And, if I'm going to be there, I'm going to work, and I found the work, the policy part of the work, I very much enjoyed working on policy and reading policy and participating in the process. And I would have never, my conscience would have let me just take up space and vote.
Right. Well, and it's funny. There's people that just want to punch a clock no matter what the job is, right?
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that old 80-20 rule, it applies everywhere.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. Well, can we ask you, do you have just a few more minutes for a couple other questions?
I do. Yes. Sorry about the noise.
No, that's okay. We've all been there. We want to talk a little bit about partisanship and because it has become such it feels like a focus the last couple of years and we want to get your opinion as someone who is sometimes marauded as being a moderate and sometimes marauded for being a Republican. What do you see as some of the key differences between the parties?
Well, in Oklahoma, it's funny. We've got Oklahoma Democrats that would be Republicans in other states,
right.
Because of just kind of the way we approach. I do think this state, I've seen a shift where we've really been kind of a center-right state. We got farther right with the growth of the Republican majority. Then, of course, because of failures of decision makers and because we, quite frankly, ignored some of the things we should have been taking care of, could play in politics with other things, we've moved back a little bit. We're still a center-right state. But I think as our metro areas grow, just like in any other state, as you see more urban growth, you're going to see people shift to the left a little bit farther. But I don't know that as a state we're ever going to, we're not going to be California anytime soon. But the partisanship that is seen is, situational. On any given day, even though some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, we might disagree on things, as soon as the disagreement was over, it was over. So I still think that, like most elected bodies, we function at a pretty high level most of the time. And then there are those things that are going to be divisive just because of, this is a two-party system and we're going to have differences of opinion. Now, in Oklahoma, the thing that put us into two special sessions was our intentional creation of a system that it just made it really, really hard to raise revenue by a vote of the people. And so the fights that were around that, this quote unquote inability to reach an agreement. Well, if it's just a regular old normal agreement where you need a majority plus one, we would have never needed a special session. Mm-hmm. But the conditions under which we were working raised that threshold, made it more difficult, made it more of a challenge, so it took a lot longer and a lot more work. But for the most part, people, the people involved in the process get along pretty well. And I know that I carried a lot of bills with a lot of my Democrat colleagues and helped them get things across the line, and always enjoyed working on those joint projects where we could find places where maybe they weren't traditional Republican issues that we could find a way to help move their goals through the process as well. And I think I'm not an outlier. Most of the people work like I do, but there's always those few. And those are the ones you see on the news.
That's true.
Even with those, it's purely situational. And I think that you'll see, the challenges in this upcoming session will be both sides trying to orient new members to the process and teach them how to do it. And it'll be up to leadership to make sure that the decorum of the bodies are maintained and that they set the stage for at least, if not agreement, at least consensus as often as possible.
You mentioned that, like when you have the requirement to get like a supermajority as opposed to like a 50% plus one, that makes it a lot more difficult. But I'm curious, do you think if the houses were split where the majority was 52 and the minority was 48, as opposed to the majority being like 73 and the majority being 27, do you think it would be harder to get to that 50% plus one? Like, do you think there would be that same level of, like, then would everything face the same kind of challenge that we face to see revenue increased?
No, I don't know that it would be that much different than it is now. I mean, if you look at the votes, the vast majority of what's done in both chambers is either unanimous or pretty darn close.
Sure.
Good policy is generally good policy. I think that the skill of the leadership in setting everybody up for success so that you've got the right committees and that the committee process works is important. And then what I always tell Oklahomans, we can get all wrapped up in R's and D's and numbers and majorities. How about we just elect a bunch of people that are problem solvers and care more about Oklahoma than they care about themselves, and then it won't matter. And so the partisanship the little bit of partisanship you see at the Capitol has also been amplified at the ballot box.
Sure.
And when people will vote for someone just because of their credential as a party member, I encourage voters that if this is a problem solver, then that should be your guy or girl if they want to solve problems, because they're not always going to win, and even whenever you lose, is like you want to be getting better. And there were some times in the last couple of years when I think we lost our focus and we weren't working to make Oklahoma better. We were just trying to win or to lose.
Sure.
And not trying to win and not to lose.
Sure. 100%. I think yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I'm curious and this is maybe more of a like philosophical question. I don't know. What makes you identify as a Republican as opposed to a Democrat? Like, why is that your kind of party identification, and that's the side of the aisle that you fall on?
And it's really, and here's one of the places I will tell you, because I get accused of being a moderate all the time because I'm not hardliner on several things, and because, partially because I can do math.
Right.
So I understand things like, a Medicaid work requirement is just cost shifting from Medicaid to 100% unreimbursed care for emergency rooms.
God bless you for saying that.
I said it on the floor.
Yes, you did.
Well, a few people listened. So,
we
math
listened.
is hard.
Mm-hmm. Math is
But I identify more as a Republican because even as someone from a social services background, I tend to believe that our government solutions should be last options, not best options. And, things like I oppose getting rid of a jury to terminate parental rights because I want to limit the power government has over family. But on the flip side, I also think if you're hurting your kid, we're going to take them.
Sure.
So those things that kind of that balance, I am pro-life because I think in this day and age with the technologies that we have, we really shouldn't need abortion any longer. We should have a thriving economy where single women can raise children on their own, and we should have ready access to the plethora of birth controls that modern science makes available so that we don't need it. I really kind of consider myself a pragmatist, but with a conservative slant, that I want to make sure that government's control over each and every one of us is as limited as possible. That's why some of the hypocrisies in the Republican Party, I would tend to kind of go away from. The unnecessary attacks on the LGBTQ community always drove me crazy because I believe in personal freedom and in choice, and in that government's supposed to not interfere with your personal choices if you're not committing crimes. And then we would have a platform that completely flew in the face of that. So from a Republican standpoint, I am truly a conservative, but I'm probably more considered a quote unquote modern day conservative. I think many of my views are probably closer to some of the conservatives that are in their 20s than folks that are that are older than that, like myself. I'm not going to tell you how old I am.
Right. Well, and, I was talking to a member of the House that's a Republican, and he said he considers himself a classic liberal Republican. And the people that people turned around because when he said that, of like, is that a thing? And so, but I think he meant the same thing, that it's different than our grandparents' Republican Party.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, Mike Turbin calls me a progressive, and I look at him and I'm like, you're trying to get me in trouble.
Right.
He says, I mean that as in someone who understands how you get to progress.
Although I would
Said, okay, I'll take that.
I would even say, I think that I have no idea how old you are, and I'm not going to venture a guess, but
29
I think
is the answer you want.
I think you're right. I think that you're probably Republican. You're close to maybe some Republicans in their 20s. I also wonder if you're close to some Republicans that are in maybe their 70s or 80s. I think, and I'm not myself a Republican, so this is me from the outside in, but I do think that certainly nationally and even locally, the Republican Party today looks different in a variety of ways than it did 40 years ago or 60 years ago.
Oh, sure.
And I think that there are some things that are maybe really important to the party now that were not nearly as important to them then. And I wonder if maybe that's kind of the vein in which you run.
I would think so. And, we also kind of lost as a state. We were elected as a pro-business. Many of us ran in pro-business, and we're going to, make it easier to do business in the state. And we're going to ensure that we have an environment where businesses can thrive. Well, you can't do that and then turn around and say, but we're not going to build anything for 3 decades. And we're going to completely abdicate our responsibility for training the workforce because we don't treat education like we should. So some of the things that we said and then what we did were in complete conflict. And I think those are things that will rectify themselves as we go through the elections. And when the people, the legislature is a responsive body. The people determine how the legislature behaves. And so when I was running in 2011 and 2012, people were still talking about gun rights and things like that. Well, they're not talking about that now.
Yeah.
And that's why you hear elected officials talking about education spending and trying to go back to being pro-business. And so the legislature also, that's what I always remind voters, is they're going to be very responsive to what input you provide. And if you're not providing input, there's no telling what's going to happen up there. So you got to stay in contact with them constantly.
That's exactly right. Today Scott and I were both at the Capitol for a tour of the restoration project, and there was about I didn't count 10 people ish that were there, 10, 12.
Yeah, I think
And that's part of my thing is we're just trying to demystify this building. You can come up here anytime you want and look, you can see parts of history, and it doesn't have to be scary, and trying to help, as always, educate people and let them know that if you call your legislator, you are doing something that 90% of the population never does. And so that voice, that's a responsibility too. Your voice is going to speak more loudly because you are one of the only people that do that.
Exactly. And I think part of my philosophy as elected was definitely impacted by my work as an advocate before I ran for office. I'd been in every office. I had left one-pagers behind about children's issues and had gone through from that side. So I always appreciated whenever people would take the time to interact with me and to provide me what they were thinking, and especially if it was in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. we had some challenges because was also an outside influence that made the people think that protest is a way to get things done. Well, I don't think that's an overly effective way to advocate. If advocacy done right now when the legislature's not in session, when you call somebody up and say, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee and have a conversation with you? And whenever you have two thoughtful persons sharing their thoughts and concerns about the future of our state is a little more productive than, marching around the building with
50,000 people on the lawn. It's funny that you mentioned that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Well, so Andy and I did after, I'll just say, I think, the teacher walkout, I think, was the big protest of this year. And after it was all, after it was all done, Andy and I, there were a couple groups that asked us to come kind of talk with them, and we kind of did like a debrief, like, so how do we think that went? How do you guys feel? And, one of the things that we told people was, okay, like marching and that's all fine, but if you really want to impact what's going to happen in the legislative session next year, the time to be doing that is now, right? Like you're like it's like in sports, the off season is when your next season is determined by how your off season goes, right? And so if you really want to influence the bills and policy and things that are going to happen starting in February of 2019, the meetings and the conversations and the relationships that you need to be building, that needs to be happening now, not in March, because in March you might get something done, but it's going to be kind of slapdash and, not necessarily the best policy, even if it temporarily fixes the problem.
Well, I said something that, you want something to change at your church because you don't like X, Y, or Z about the service. And so let's say you don't talk to your pastor and you don't talk to your deacon, and you decide one day that you and all your friends are going to show up and hang out in the parking lot during church. And they go, what? They would never do that. And I said, well, that's basically what happened. I had,
that's such a great
analogy.
Tailgate
party. There was a tailgate party in the parking lot while we were trying to work, and none of those people had talked to us, and that was true. I mean, I interacted very frequently with a lot of the superintendents in my district, but even people that I had taught with had never once reached out to me, sent me an email, picked up the phone, called me, and they'd had my phone number for 15 years. And then they showed up in my office at the Capitol. And I thought, wait a minute.
It's funny. It's funny that you bring up the church analogy, because I think actually it was 1 or 2 weeks before the walkout, we had Senator McCourtney on to kind of talk about, so what do you think is going to happen? How's this all going to go? I'm pretty sure it was him that he was like, he's like, I've been a member of a church in Ada for 40 years, and we talk about how to change the carpet in the church, and it's just like a process of 5 years. And it was just funny because he used a very similar analogy of imagine that you were going to have a congregational meeting to get the carpet changed at your church, how that would go in terms of trying to reach consensus in the legislature. So I think it is both amusing and very apropos that you use the same analogy talking about the walkout.
Well, we're back to the most challenging thing is the misconception on how everything works. I was listening, and I, of course, now in the election system, I'm listening to, people are running for office for the first time, and they'll talk about all these things that they're going to do, and we all just want to laugh and go, no, you're not.
Yeah.
That's not how, because some of it is, I'm like, you can't. When we've got people running for governor that what they're going to instruct the legislature to do, and I'm like, yeah, that's not how that works.
Right.
Or,
good luck with that. Yeah. It's just like when you're running
the Attorney General candidate.
Right. Yeah.
The Attorney General candidates that are going to instruct district attorneys. I'm like, yeah, nope, good luck.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Not how that works. They don't work for them.
But it's
exactly.
like when you're running for student council president, in junior high, and you're like, I'm going to bring back snack machines. It's like, that's not your decision at all to make, but that doesn't matter, right? And this is the problem, is that voters vote on that stuff. They vote based on that stuff. They vote on the idea. Like, well, I like that he or she says that. And what we're trying to say is, like, that stuff doesn't matter. Like, let's listen to what they can do,
right?
And to try to educate voters to know the difference between what a candidate can and cannot feasibly do in their tenure. Like, we're all about hope and change, and we want a better Oklahoma for everybody, but like, you can't do all that stuff, and so. You got to have some passion, but you got to have some reality as well.
Well, and you have to understand too. I mean, to kind of what you alluded to earlier, Senator, that and you said this too, Andy. People tell us all the time, like, "Well, I just want to vote this person out." Okay, first of all, well, you can't just vote against them, right? You have to vote for someone else.
For somebody else.
And if you're gonna vote a new person in, as opposed to your rep or your senator who's been there for 8 or 10 years. I mean, that's fine, but the freshman that's going to come in is going to have a lot less gravitas, a lot less credibility, a lot less pull. They're not going to be a committee chair, right? Like so you could try to build a relationship with that person that already represents you and understands how to pull the very complicated levers of government, or you can just say, I'm going to vote for this other person who decided they were going to run because they were upset about something. Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned Senator McCourtney also. One day he texted a group of us and he said, "Hey, I'm sitting at a candidate forum with a couple of people running for the first time. Please tell me I didn't sound that dumb when I ran." To which we all responded, "Yep, you did."
That's right. We need to have him back on to talk about this whole medical marijuana thing. He's done a great job heading up that the joint task force.
He is a bright, shining star, and part of the reason why I can leave with a clear conscience and know that the people of the state of Oklahoma are in good hands.
He's a good dude. Well, Senator, do you have time for one, maybe 2 more questions?
Sure, keep going.
So this is this first one. This is a, I don't want to call it a softball, but I'm really excited to ask you about it. So my wife is a licensed clinical social worker. She works.
So is my wife.
It's true. It's true. we both married up.
They're different women.
Yes. My wife, Ashley, she works with an agency here in town that does foster care, adoptions. They do foster care support. They work with therapy for families with foster kids. And she's been in that part of, I guess, the industry, if you would call it, that part of health services for kids for probably the last 6-7 years now. And in that time, because I'm married to her, I have become much more familiar with something called trauma-informed care. And what it means for, a pediatrician or a judge or a social worker or a therapist or whoever to be trauma informed and how important that is. And you and Representative Carol Bush this last session had a bill creating a trauma-informed care task force, right? That exists to make recommendations for DHS. And the question is this. Can you please tell all of our listeners what trauma-informed care is, why it's so important, and what your task force is going to do?
Well, the things that we have learned over the last decade about the brain and the impact of trauma on brain development through a study that I hope many people are familiar with, the ACE study that tracks adverse childhood experiences then looks at the long-term health, both mental health and physical health of an individual based on how many instances of adverse experiences they have as children, has taught us that when we make decisions about everything from how we, who we place children with, if they have to be removed from their home, to the training that we should have for our pediatricians and our nurses and our frontline workers and our DHS caseworkers, that all of those should always be wrapped around what we understand about trauma in the developing brain. And so the task force, which because of my departure will be actually headed up by Senator Greg McCourtney and Senator Kay Floyd, with the help of the Oklahoma Institute for Child Advocacy, will look at how do we infuse this new science into our decision-making processes for children in education, in child welfare, in juvenile justice, in healthcare, and in the community as a whole, and then make sure that all of the people along the touch points of that kid's life understands trauma and make decisions informed about its possible consequences. We talked earlier about the way that we're going to change, how we deal with children that are born with drug affected because of what we now know on the brain science, and that kids actually fare much better if they're not, they don't suffer a subsequent trauma by being removed from their caregiver that just gave birth to them. So the decision-making process must be trauma-informed, so that people need to understand how that brain is impacted by trauma and how it should impact the way that we make decisions.
I think
that's my 5-minute spiel.
That's so important, especially because, the ACEs study, we learned about when I was in medical school, and then we talked about it again in residency. But I think what you're hitting on that's new is, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we knew that if you had experienced, for instance, how like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of these different adverse childhood events, we know that means that you're, like, in terms of your medical health, like, your life expectancy is lower. It means your likelihood of being incarcerated is higher. It means you're much more likely to suffer from certain chronic health addictions or health problems. You're much more likely to be a smoker. Like, we knew all of that. But I think what's new is this understanding that, one, how early those traumas can occur, and 2, understanding how profound the impact is of those things on neurodevelopment and how that impacts attachment and child behavior as they grow. And I think that there's the institute funded by Karen Purvis at TCU has done a ton of work in this with TBRI, trust-based relational intervention, and I'm seeing, it's not something that I use on a day-to-day basis as a pediatrician, but seeing what Ashley does and what the people she works with, what a profound impact that this has on those kids. I just wanted to say, mostly hear you talk about it and say thank you for doing that, because I think that has the potential to be really just a huge impact on the kids and families of Oklahoma.
I do as well, and I'm encouraged that we've got people that are willing to work on that issue, and there's a great partnership being built around trauma-informed care in Oklahoma.
Absolutely.
Well, last question I have, and Andy, if you've got any more, you can throw it out there. But
No.
So you're leaving. This is you'll be done when someone wins your seat and gets sworn in. There's a lot of turnover in the legislature this year. There's going to be a lot of fresh faces in February next year. What advice do you have to all the freshmen that are going to be coming in? And more specifically, there's going to be freshman Republicans, there's going to be freshman Democrats, there's going to be people that are only in their second term. Something like half the legislature on each side is going to be there for 4 years or less.
60%.
Right.
What is the best advice that you have generally, and on how they can come together and be less divided, or at least have the perception be that they're less divided?
Well, the first thing I say, don't take yourself too seriously. In that building, it is very easy to get wrapped up in what happens, and there are days that it feels like the center of the universe, and quite frankly, it isn't. If the new legislature will make sure that they don't take themselves too seriously, and that they don't take themselves too seriously, but that they also kind of stay dedicated to the things that they understand, and in all other things, listen and learn and be a student of the process, then they'll be successful. And that's all they need to do.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on the show. I'm going to go ahead and say right now that if you have the time among your myriad new responsibilities in your post-legislative life, we would love to get you back on the show and get Ashley and Katie and have a whole just
both
trauma and foster care whole episode. And
Both
just
of
talk
our
about it.
wives wanted to be here tonight, and they couldn't. And so we may have to have a redo and just have them co-host the episode. That'd be way better.
I think this is like a great idea. It'd probably be your best show ever.
It definitely
It would
would.
be. No, I told Ashley, I said, hey, babe, I said, AJ Griffin's going to be on Friday. And she was like, what? She's like, I love her. I was like, I know.
Well, I look forward to that opportunity, and let's make sure we make it happen.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll talk to you later then.
Okay, thanks, guys.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thanks to Senator AJ Griffin for her time and her candor. Don't forget to subscribe and rate Let's Pod This on Apple Podcasts. And now you can find us on Spotify. We're like kind of legit and stuff. Also, I will say that we are Oklahoma's highest rated and most rated political podcast. So thanks to everyone who listens. Please tell your friends. Spread the word. We would love for you to get involved. And even if you want to come on the podcast, or if you've got a topic for us, reach out to us at podcast@letsfixthisok.org. You can tweet at us at letsfixthisok. You can tweet at Scott and I individually if you would like. We're also on Instagram and Twitter at letsfixthisok on both of those. Be sure to like our page and go to our website, letsfixthisok.org. Sign up for our newsletter. I should have some stuff coming out in the next week. We've got a couple of debates coming up, so look for details on that. And don't forget, we're going to have a kick-ass election watch party in November. You will not want to miss that. It's no tickets. It's free to come at the Tower Theater on November 6th, and it's going to be legit awesome. I promise you. You can also make a donation if you want to help support us, which would be really awesome because we don't have much money and we do this out of the goodness of our hearts and our own pockets here in Scott's upstairs upper room studios. Let's Fix This is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization who strives to educate and equip all Oklahomans. That's you, listeners. We want to educate you and help you become more engaged with your government. We encourage you to get involved in any way you can. And remember, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a great week.